The question is that the motion be agreed to. Dr Megan Woods.
Mr Speaker, and it's my pleasure to take a call on the Riccarton Racecourse Development Enabling Bill, a piece of legislation that I note started its life as a local bill and is back in this House now as a government bill. And it was a pleasure to be involved in working through this bill. It of course covers a very important part of Christchurch, the Riccarton Racecourse area being in the Wigram electorate, and a part of the city of which I have very good connections about what's happening in that community. Because, Mr Speaker, this is a piece of legislation that is changing a Reserves Act that was put in place in the 19th century in 1878 to establish a racecourse for the city of Christchurch on the outskirts of the city. And this was a place that was imagined that was going to last for generations. And Mr Speaker, what we're seeing with this legislation is the continuation of that racing facility to the west of our city, situated at Riccarton Park. We can all still go and enjoy the New Zealand Cup there and hopefully have a good flutter. But Mr Speaker, what is going to change once this legislation is enacted and the potential for people to be able to develop on that site? Because I think it's very important to acknowledge that this legislation in no ways starts the process of building houses. What this legislation does is make it possible for development to occur on this site, and that is the purpose of the legislation. And some of those homes, I am reliably told by the trustees of the Riccarton Park Racecourse, will actually be down the long stretch starters run at Riccarton, and they're assuming that that will be some of the most sought after land in this development for those who are keen on racing. But Mr Speaker, this development has not been without some concerns of locals who live in the area. And they were real concerns, and concerns that needed to be listened to, and concerns that needed to be considered while we went through this legislation. One concern, and one that came through very strongly from constituents and locals in the area, was around the lack of transport planning that sits alongside this development. That when this idea for this development first came to the fore, what it was going to be was an exemplar project. Now, an exemplar project was a fast-tracked way of doing development in post-quake Christchurch. And to qualify as an exemplar development, several factors needed to be met. There needed to be a proportion of affordable houses in the development, and although this isn't proceeding as an exemplar project, I do note that the same number of affordable houses under the definition of affordable that would have been used in the exemplar project will still be in place. There needed to be thought given to the amenity and to the urban design that went into the development, and there also needed to be consideration of the infrastructure and transport planning that sat beside a development. And Mr Speaker, one of the things that I have growing concerns as the local member in this area is that we are not putting adequate transport planning into the west of Christchurch as we expand into that area and the city grows in a westward direction. Anyone that travels along Yoldhurst Road on a regular basis will know that you cannot simply tumble another 600 households into this area and not give serious thought to how it is that we're going to move people around. Because, Mr Speaker, we have a huge opportunity and a really exciting opportunity in Christchurch as we are rebuilding and we are recovering and making our lives again in that city to actually do some stuff that it makes us fit for the 21st century, to put in place proper public transport planning as we are planning our housing developments, and not just take a 20th century view of how it is that we do development. We have the opportunity to think, what is the potential for rail from the west of the city that would go through this area? I note when, and the Minister noted in his speech that when Riccarton Racecourse was first established, one of the most important parts of establishing that racecourse was getting a rail siding in place so that you could get the people of Christchurch out to the races in the 19th century. And Mr Speaker, that rail siding is still there. And I think that it is time that we started thinking in our city about how it is we can be a progressive, modern, 21st century city that isn't burying our heads in the sand and looking backwards and not forwards. Because that is what is happening with the kind of planning that this government is putting in place, and I think it is a real shame that we lost that opportunity to do that kind of transport planning and infrastructural planning to sit alongside it. Another concern, and a valid concern, that residents in the local area had was the way in which the development would face. That we see far too many subdivisions happen around this country that turn their backs to the road and to the local community, and front gardens face inward to the new development rather than outward to existing streets. But that was something that we were able to work through at a public meeting with the developers around whether or not this really would be part of the existing community that exists in that part of Riccarton and around the racecourse, and it has flourished because, Mr Speaker, there is a real community that lives in this area. The racecourse employs hundreds of people on site, and many of them live in this area and have for several generations. That it is an important part of their home. And to the locals who already live there and have made their lives and their homes there, it was important to them that there was an ability to integrate these new homes and this new development into their neighbourhood. And that is something that I, as the local member for Wigram, am happy to support them on, because I think that is important, that we're also building communities and neighbourhoods as well as houses and homes, and that we're building strong and resilient communities as we go through. And I would also like to acknowledge the Board of Trustees of Riccarton Racecourse, who were more than willing to work with the local residents and to talk through concerns that residents did have as we went through there. And I just now want to turn my attention to some of the comments that the Minister made in his speech, Mr Speaker. That what we heard was the Minister respond to a very innocuous interjection from my colleague Phil Twyford with quite a tirade, a very defensive tirade, Mr Speaker, about how it is we can look to Christchurch as progress as a strong direction for Auckland. Now, I've been listening to this kind of nonsense from that Minister and his boss, the Prime Minister, for days now, and this is complete nonsense. What we have is a completely unique and different set of circumstances in Christchurch. We had a natural disaster where in the course of a few days we lost thousands of houses. And with that loss of houses, we had the coming in of insurance money, of course too slow. That insurance money hasn't tumbled in at the kind of rate that we would like to have seen. But what we had was the ability to redevelop and rebuild in a way that, just for the Minister and the Prime Minister to say this is the exemplar for Auckland, just sends a chill down my spine. Because this sounds suspiciously like the kind of softening up that Nick Smith did before he sacked the Regional Council in Canterbury. That he is laying the blame on the Auckland Council rather than accepting blame for a housing crisis that he has created and he has failed to address. That what he is doing is that he is softening up to sack another council. Right. And that he is unwilling to take the responsibility. Because, Mr Speaker, he and his boss, the Prime Minister, have been going around saying that we can look to what's happened in Christchurch, and the Prime Minister, who can never get a name right, talks about how ECANS has been granting consents in the city. Well, the Prime Minister should take note that ECAN, the Regional Council in Canterbury, is not the body that grants building consents. So if the Prime Minister is going to go around and talk about what he wants to see to be the model in Auckland to the way to fix it, perhaps he could actually get his facts straight. But why should he bother? Because this is he and Nick Smith softening up to sack yet another democratically elected council because they want to sidestep the blame for their failure in government to do what they were elected to do, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, I am happy to support this bill, and Labor is happy to support this Riccarton Racecourse bill, but I would like to see the government keep its rhetoric in check. I would like to see the government stick to the facts, and I would like to see the government actually talk about and have some concerns for the local communities that they are impacting when we do this kind of legislation. This isn't a chance for the Minister to stand up and progress an agenda that he clearly has. This is a chance for him to talk about a particular community in Christchurch and a particular community that is going to be impacted in a particular way. And I would like to hear some discussion on that from contributions from subsequent government speakers. Thank you.